Hello, this is Umbral Dragon. I hope you guys have had fun playing Mythras. Today I'm going to talk to you about animism. I know I had talked about it before, and I was going to make a video earlier, but like a lot of you, I have family. Um, there's a lot of things going on in the world that just tie me up, and so I didn't have time to do anything. So I hope you can forgive me, but we're going to try to get through this. I'm going to skip some things. There's some things you're just going to have to read on your own because it's, it's kind of a long chapter, and we don't have to go over everything. You just need to kind of get the basic idea of what animism is and how to use trance and binding to summon spirits to create magical effects, basically. I mean, you're going to be using animism. You're probably a shaman of some sort, and you're trying to use the magic of the spirits to aid you in whatever endeavors you're about. Right, during your role playing experiences, your characters will be about going their adventures, doing their adventures, and exploring and doing whatnot, and they may need different sorts of powers, and just like a sorcerer would, or anybody else that uses magic. And that's not to say that shamans can't be formidable warriors, but they do rely on spirits, and they do often make forays into the spirit world. So, without further ado, I'm also going to suggest another book. I hope I don't get in trouble, but it's the Legend RPG, and it's called, what was it called? It's called Spirit Magic. Yeah, okay, something simple. Go figure. Spirit Magic. And there's, even though that is old material, it might help open up some ideas for you. Just like looking at other material, helps open up ideas into how you can expand your game into something a little more creative, a little more unique, something a little more you, right? And the way you want to play your character, and maybe the way your dungeon master or game master wants to wants his setting to unfold. As the stories and plots and all this stuff begin to unfold the setting a little more and make it more real, and make it more you and make it more theirs as well. So let's start. Okay, so animism is magic, and it's worked through communing with spirits and the spirit world. It's the magic of the shaman and spirit walkers. Animism relies on forming multiple relationships with many spirits that themselves embody magical effects, which are made available to the shaman. Gathering spirits requires negotiation, sometimes combat, and frequent expeditions into the spirit world. What are spirits? Spirits are metaphysical manifestations of a particular aspect of the cosmos. Well, that's a lot. That's a lot to say. They are non-corporeal. They possess motivations, perceptions, and outlooks very different to those of the material world, and have, through their connections with the spirit world, developed great powers and abilities. Okay. I don't know how else to explain that, but that's pretty good. Even though it's very wordy and kind of high English, right? The spirit world mirrors the mundane world and resides close to it, intersecting with it in some places, but it's otherwise invisible and separate. As a plane of existence, it's infinite, it has no shape, it reflects all aspects of the material world, so it seems at once familiar and alien all at once. Nothing physical can exist there, only the non-corporeal, okay? So we're talking non-corporeal, so let's talk about states of being. So that's the next thing up here. The next heading, states of being. The soul or spirit that inhabits a physical thing, be it a living body or an animate object, is defined as being corporeal. That's you and me. In this world, right now, we are corporeal. Conversely, a soul pulled from its physical body into the spirit realm is considered discorporate, right? You heard of the silver thread. That's what connects you to your spirit, and your body is here, and your soul is in the spirit realm, right? So a soul pulled from the physical body into the spirit world is considered discorporate. The last state of being applies to spirits that naturally reside in the spirit world and lack any tie to a physical body or object. These are defined as manifested when they emerge into the mundane world. Okay, and that's a special power, is manifestation, right? Okay, trance and binding. Here we go. Starting to get to the nitty gritty here. Animists learn two magical skills, trance and binding. Trance enables the animist to perceive spirits and enter the spirit world. Binding allows animists to summon, dominate, and bind spirits in spirit combat. Okay? Trance. Trance represents the animist's awareness of the spirit world and his ability to move between it and the material world. Alright, so you can detect spirits, but based on your level, like there's cult rank, there's followers, spirit worshippers, shamans, and high shamans, and it shows on the trance preparation timetable. It takes you an hour before of trance before you can observe spirits. If you're at the level of spirit worshipper, it takes you an hour and a minute to converse with spirits and observe spirits, of course. And as a shaman level, it takes you around a minute and an hour to project yourself into the spirit world. And as a high shaman, you can actually drag souls into the spirit realm. Yikes. Okay, so each further level of knowledge allows the skill to be used in new ways, permitting observation, communication, eventually freedom to travel the spirit plane. Interacting directly with the spirit plane takes time, normally requiring that a ritual be performed to enter a trance-like state. The amount of time required depends on the ability being used, and costs 1 magic point. If the skill check is successful, then you can perform the following, depending on your cult rank, right? If you're a follower, you can observe and identify spirits within range. If you're a spirit worshipper, you can converse with spirits within range via empathetic communication, right? That means you're not actually talking with them. You can sense their emotions and things like that. As a shaman, you can project your own soul into the spirit plane. As a high shaman, you can drag the souls of others onto the spirit plane with them at a cost of 1 extra magic point per additional person. Shamans and high shamans may travel the spirit plane to observe and locate other spirits. Alright. Now, binding. Binding is a skill used by animists to induce or force a spirit to perform his will. It has several different applications. It can bind spirits into a fetish, which is the main thing you're going to be doing, right? It can be used to persuade a spirit or to perform a single deed. You can do that. It can be used to summon known spirits from across the spirit plane. Very rarely will you know the name of a spirit. It's up to the game master, and so when you do, those will be valuable and highly guarded, right? Okay, and it can be used to engage in spirit combat. That's what you got to do to bind a spirit into a fetish. Okay, you have to beat him first. That's the negotiation part, right? It's called spirit combat. It's a form of it can take many different forms, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But spirit combat is what you're going to use to put the spirit to beat the spirit, whether it's an argument or a memory, something like that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, when it's used to engage in spirit combat, the value of the binding skill is used to calculate the amount of damage inflicted. Alright, so if you have a binding skill of about 50, 41 to 60 on this table, the spirit damage table, you will do 1d6 points of damage every time you damage somebody in spirit combat. Another spirit usually, okay? Or you can use the average roll of 4 and just use 4 points at a time. It's up to you, okay? Spirits and societies. Let me reduce this again one more time. I had this so I could read it to you and not be so off camera. My eyes looking the other way. Okay, so spirits are fundamental parts of society and treated with reverence and respect and fear, not as magical batteries or buffs. I don't, I don't normally allow characters to use them as, uh, buffs and magic items. They're to be revered. They're usually ancestors or nature spirits that they themselves worship. So they often will pray to these types of spirits and will think very highly of them and generally don't want to take advantage of them and use them, just like they were some tool, you know, like a fork or a spoon or whatever. It's something more than that. There should be some reverence to that. Animists who walk the other world, binding spirits against their will, treating them as accoutrements, will soon gain a poor reputation, not only amongst their peers, but also amongst spirits friendly to that culture, and gradually be alienated as a result. So the spirits talk amongst themselves. So you will also have your own reputation in the spirit world as well. Powerful shamans tend to attract attention in the spirit world. Alright? This is just a point of fact. Okay? So player characters, shamans should expect occasional, very unpleasant surprises. You become popular, people seek you out, even the bad ones, right? Spirit cults tend to be loose affiliations of animists or may simply consist of members of single family, clan, or race who venerate particular spirits, right? So shamanistic cults are not really like these hard schools of magic, though they can be. It's up to you. I mean, it's your Mythras is your Mythras. Remember that. Above all else, you can run it however you want to. If anyone tells you how to run your Mythras, they're probably not playing it right, because you should have the power to do whatever you want. The spirits of ancestors might also be members of tradition or be friendly towards it. Now, this is not to say, going back to the idea of running your own Mythras, um, if you don't run something that people like, let's say you railroad people too much, or you do some things that, this is controversial stuff, and you expect people to be fully immersed in their characters, that's not always going to happen. If you're not open-minded to some extent, all right, um, you might draw people away from your game, right? And so people may not want to play with you. So you got to have a little bit of give and take. It's just a relationship, right? Like anything else. So going back to animism, um, because there's so many ways to approach spirit worship, cults tend to be diverse, but as a rule of thumb, each spirit tradition tends to have, number one, direct access to a number of specific types of spirit, knowledge of how to locate a further uh, types of spirit. So in other words, they have direct access and knowledge to get further spirits. So there's these ones we know of. We also know of these ones, but these are not the ones we interact with all the time, right? So these are the ones we normally interact with. We know of these other ones that we can interact with, and at least one enemy or competing cult, right? So they know at least one enemy spirit um, type, okay? And they're treated as actively hostile towards you, basically. Depending on the setting, most will have access to allied medicine, nature, and ancestor spirits. Okay, I always do this, and this is just the rule of thumb for me. You don't have to do this, but a medicine fetish for healing, nature fetish, because you're tied to the land, right? Usually, if you're a shaman, you kind of are a nature boy, to some extent, even a little bit. So you probably have some type of nature spirit. Um, and what did we say? An ancestor spirits, right? Um, these are the core spirits upon which a cult can be based, but it is not necessary for a cult to possess knowledge of all of them. Okay, I'd rather just do all of them at once, just to make it easier. But you can have If you like making cults and brotherhoods, you know what, you can make as many as you want. It's up to you. Um, the types of allied spirit can vary with the focus of the tradition. Yeah, could be a bear cult, could be an eagle cult, could be, you know, a deer cult, right? Usually, save for some high fantasy or sword and sorcery settings, curse, death, and bane spirits are not an active part of any particular tradition, and any shaman attempting to bind them into service is taking a serious risk. I like sword and sorcery, and so those are some staple things in my games. So take heed. It's magic is usually a corrupting thing in sort of swords and sorcery games. You know, if you look at Elric of Melniboné, his sword, right, was a demonic sword, and he killed the people he loved because of it, the cursed sword, right? So magic is corrupting, and so I use that motif in most of my sword and sorcery games. But you don't have to do that. Remember, your Mythras is your Mythras. Typically, a spirit is an intangible entity lacking any physical substance. We're at defining spirits on page 132. At their simplest, they are magical fragments of life force cycling between the material world and the mythic or metaphysical sources of the universe. Like, so the nature spirits are saying they recycle these spirits, right? So when a baby deer is born, then a new spirit comes and inhabits this baby deer, and so it's a deer spirit, right? And then when it gets killed, it wanders the woods or plains or wherever it's at, right? Wherever it normally congregates, right? And then when another one is born, they in turn cycle through the wheel of time or the circle of life or whatever you want to call it. All right. And souls, right? Are spirits that remain tied to a living physical body in the material world. Got it? Spirits, souls. Spirits, souls. Spirits, souls. Spirits are generally aware of their surroundings and capable of reacting to circumstances. Those with plant and animal sentience use their base empathetic drives, such as love, hunger, or fear, to communicate. Sapient spirits are fully intelligent, capable of far more subtle communication, approaching that of true language. Alright, so let's continue. We haven't got to the best parts yet. Okay, the only way for a soul to transcend the spirit world is through death, being made discorporate, or using the trance skill. There you go. Spirit intensity. All spirits have an intensity. Intensity is based on a spirit's POW, and measures three things: the benefit it can give to the spirit's controller, how difficult the spirit is to bind and control, and the spirit's ability to influence the material world. The greater a spirit's POW, the greater its intensity. The spirit intensity table can be used in a number of ways to determine this relationship. To determine the intensity of, say, a recently deceased creature, cross-reference its POW range from life with its intensity. Most player characters, for example, when they die, will produce an intensity 1 or 2 spirit. And if we look at the table, we see that that's true, because with a POW range of 7 to 12, you would be an intensity 1 spirit. Oh, yeah. And 13 to 18 would be intensity 2. To create a spirit that originates in the spirit world, decide on its intensity. I would go with between 1 and 3. Okay. Then roll POW is defined by the spirit's intensity table. 1d6 plus 18, for instance, for an intensity 3 spirit. The lowest intensity spirits are by far the most prevalent, but offer the least amount of benefit. A spirit with an intensity of 0 can not affect the material world in any noticeable manner. Intensity 6 and greater. They have more than 36 POW. Are stretching beyond the control of a lone animus, but may still be summoned, bargained with, or even bound by several practitioners working together. Collaborative, right? Characteristics. Spirits also possess two other characteristics, either int or ins, instinct, right? Animals have instinct, right? And cha, charisma. This int, reflects their level of intellect when alive, or the corresponding physical creature if one exists. Um, Charisma reflects the force of the spirit's personality, very much the same way for play characters. Right? Alright, attributes. You have action points, calculate using the sum of int and pow. Initiative bonus, figure using the average of int and cha. Magic points, calculated as normal, but are used by spirits and souls as their hit points, unless you use tenacity. In which case, I would suggest use tenacity for hit points for player characters. Yeah. And NPCs. But for spirits, I would use magic points as their hit points. Okay. And I'll tell you why later. Let's just make it real simple. If you use magic points and you're depleting magic points, and you're a shaman and you're beating up somebody who uses magic points like a sorcerer, and you're taking their magic points away like hit points, they have no recourse, right? They can run out of magic points really, really quick, especially if they're accessing spells. And in order to avoid that, we use tenacity. So this way they still have the full access to their magic, right? Their full magical capability. But their tenacity goes down to 0, then they're out of there. They're beat, okay? Either way, and that works both for the shaman and the sorcerer, right? Or the other spellcaster. So I think tenacity is a good way to do it. We'll talk more about that later, I think. But I would definitely think about using tenacity as opposed to magic points. Spirit damage based upon the value of spirit's spectral combat skill or soul's binding skill. See the spirit damage table on page 131, right? 131. Right there, spirit damage, right? Average roll damage inflicted according to the skill value. Alright, so moving onward. Let's see, we are at 22 minutes already in about 30 seconds, so this is not going fast, but we'll try to move it along. Alright, or I might have to divide this into 2 videos. So attitude, right? Neutral spirits consist of both those that belong to traditions which are not hostile toward the shaman. Spirits that belong to the shaman's tradition will most likely be friendly. Hostile spirits belong to enemy traditions or are inherently antagonistic due to their nature. Alright. Locating and gaining spirits. In the spirit world, spirits can be found inhabiting objects or locations relevant to their originating powers of training caves, for instance, for darkness spirits, forests for plant spirits, and so on. Remote places are generally favored because there's diminished interference from other, more disturbing sources of magic. Ancestor spirits typically live in communities mirroring their corporeal homes, or may have made for themselves a new home, such as a feasting hall, a medicine lodge, or spirit manse. Alright. Locating a spirit normally requires an animist to either scour the mundane world using trance to view the spirit plane. Number 2, shift fully into the spirit world. 3, journey to a location known to his tradition. Or 4, have someone of greater skill, rank, or knowledge summon a known spirit for the animist. Spirits might be relatively easy to locate. Knowing how to control one is an entirely different matter. Each spirit has its own idiosyncrasies regarding how it can be found, propitiated, or bound. Once located, animists may approach the spirits in 2 ways. You can negotiate, looking to strike a bargain, or you can bind it, seeking to bind the spirit into continued service. Spirit negotiation. Alright. Most animists attempt to strike bargains, providing something the spirit wants in return for a single service for the animist. Once communication has been established, the animist may then request the spirit's aid to perform a single task in return for performing a like service for the spirit. On the most abstract level, it can be assumed that the task will cost the animist a number of experience rolls equal to the spirit's intensity per year to complete the service or suffer an inconvenience. Spirit binding. Here we go. Binding a spirit always requires the animist to engage the spirit directly in spirit combat. If he is able to compel a bargain, excuse me, or lower the spirit to 0 magic points, and its power does not exceed the limit set by his binding skill, the animist may then bind it into a fetish, a location, or a creature. Each type of binding necessitating its own requirements in terms of use and vulnerability, often in the form of taboos. Fetish bindings. A fetish is a ceremonial object that embodies magical power. Whilst confined within its fetish, a spirit cannot be harmed by hostile magic or other spirits. It remains in stasis, unaware of its surroundings. Over time, any animist possessing a fetish takes on some of the spirit's essence. So, owner of a bear tooth holding a bear spirit may feel dozy in winter or take on bearish odor. Since the spirit of a fetish only submits to the control of whoever is holding the object, animists closely and jealously guard their fetishes. Location binding. The spirit can also be bound to a specific location. This is usually done to protect an area. Within this region, the spirit is both visible and vulnerable to direct magical assault unless it has manifestation ability to travel back and forth from the spirit plane. Often hostile spirits are bound to locations instead of fetishes, imprisoning them so they cannot cause harm. Creature binding. Spirits can also be bound into the body of a living creature. In principle, the creature is loyal to whoever bound it or the person they have assigned it to. Drawbacks are that it is now vulnerable to physical damage. The spirit's abilities only affect the body it is bound to. The creature must be tattooed or branded with the spirit's binding. And most dubitable of all, unlike possession, the creature's original soul must be permanently sundered from its body, in effect killing it to make space for the new spirit. Totemists are avid practitioners of creating such living fetishes, placing spirits into the bodies of their totem animals, who then act as animal companions. Creating and binding. Creation of binding costs 1 experience roll per point of intensity of the spirit. You have 3 experience rolls. There you go. And you can do 3 intensity ones, a 2 and a 1, or you can do a 3. The ritual usually takes 1 week, at the end of which the animist should roll the spirit's characteristics randomly based on its intensity. It is always possible the spirit gained may be too powerful for the animist to control. An animist can attempt to improve the binding's potency to contain a more powerful spirit of the same type by paying the difference in experience rolls. Thus, an animist with a fetish capable of containing an intensity 2 animal spirit could upgrade it to hold an intensity 3 animal spirit by paying an experience roll. The recipient of a fetish or creature binding does not need to have bound the spirit himself. The bound spirit counts against the supplicant's limit, not the shaman's. Animists of less than shaman rank are not prevented from undertaking the search and binding a spirit personally, save that such tasks are sometimes dangerous and would be frowned upon by peers of the community if, for instance, the attempt ended with a malicious spirit possessing the would-be fetish maker. Shamans usually only provide spirits to members of the same tradition or in recompense for great favors. Physically destroying a binding by killing the host creature or shattering its fetish, for instance, immediately unbinds the spirit it contains. It goes back to the spirit world. Okay. So, limits to bound spirits. The maximum number of spirits an animist can hold in bondage depends on the cult rank. So, a follower, 1/4 cha. Spirit worshipper, half the cha. Shaman, 3/4 of the cha, and a high shaman, all their cha. Right, so this number, if this number is ever exceeded, then the strongest spirit of spirits break free, right, from the strongest to the weakest. Alright. Using spirits. A spirit's magical effects are persistent, lasting until it's sent away, countermanded, or recalled to a fetish. So it comes out, it does its thing, continues to do its thing until it's recalled back into its fetish. Okay? Alright. This can make animists formidable foes. Animists generally use their spirits in one of two ways. They call upon a materially bound spirit or summon a spirit from far away to perform an agreed task. Commanding a bound spirit, we're at calling upon a binding on page 136. Calling a bound spirit takes an action. Okay? If you got 2 action points, that's 1 already used up. 1 magic point, and a binding skill roll. If you fail, the spirit ignores the command. The animist must wait until the next turn to try again. Alright. A fumble. If the command is so badly botched the binding is broken, allowing the spirit to return to the spirit plane or to return on the animist if hostile. Alright. So, that can work against you. You don't want to fumble. Have failure, it just ignores it, right? A success, the spirit's commanded successfully performs the deed requested of it. Awesome, done. Critical success, the command is not only successful, but costs the animist no magic points. Oh, so there you go. While under control, the spirit performs its destruction to the best of its abilities, yet if the animist wishes it to perform a different task, he must use a new command with the requisite magic point cost and binding skill roll. And then you got to do it all over again, right? Alright. So make sure you know what you're doing. Summoning a spirit. Animists can summon spirits they have successfully negotiated with previously or know the true name of. The latter something which is normally held secret by members of the animist cult or tradition. Alright. Attitude of a summoned spirit is right here on the table, right? Summoning attempt costs the animist a number of magic points equal to the spirit's intensity and requires a binding test. Alright, fumble. The spirit is mortally offended. That's not good. Failure. The spirit fails to notice the call. You can try again the following day. Success. The spirit hears the summoning and arrives in 1d6 minutes. And critical success. The spirit anticipates its summons arriving in 1d3 rounds. What happens then depends on the spirit's attitude towards the summoner, whether it owes the animist a service. To determine how helpful or malicious it is, the spirit makes an opposed test of its willpower against the animist summoning skill. Refer the result on the attitude of a summoned spirit's table up there. Yeah, attitude of a summoned spirit. Okay. Spirit combat. Alright. Page 137. Engaging in spirit combat. Spirit combat works almost identically to normal combat, save that mortal combatants use their spirit attributes rather than physical attributes as described earlier in this chapter. Rather than wielding weapons, spirits have a spectral combat skill to make psychic attacks and parries. Animists use their binding skill, whereas those uninitiated to animism must rely on their willpower skill instead if you were yanked into the spirit world. Yeah. As with the physical combat, each attack and parry exchange in spirit combat is treated as a differential roll. If one or more levels of success are achieved, the spirit combat special effects may be selected. In addition, a successful attack, which is not parried, inflicts an amount of damage equal to the attacker's spirit damage roll to the defender's magic points, unless you're using tenacity. Fleeing spirit combat is not always possible. On the spirit plane, however, discorporated animists, instead of trying to damage their opponent, declare that they are using a combat action to try to escape back to their body. An opposed test of the animist's trance skill against the spirit's spectral combat skill is required. If you win, you break free. If the spirit wins, the animist fails to get away. It is impossible for souls who do not have the trance skill to conscientiously escape from the spirit world, as they have no knowledge or understanding of how to move within it. Only if they defeat or drive off their attacker will they be freed from its discorporation. Otherwise, they must be rescued by an animist. Sucks to be you. Combat continues until the fight is concluded by use of a special effect, or one of the combatants is reduced to 0 magic points or tenacity, at which points they are defeated. Okay. So you see the Spirit Combat special effects. Their special effects is Bleed Essence, Compel Bargain, Drive Off, Leech Strength, Obscure, Possess, Psychic Stun, Restrain, Spirit Lance, Sunder Binding, Suppressibility, Turn Back, Withdraw. Consequences of defeat. If a participant in Spirit Combat reaches 0 tenacity or magic points, they are reduced to a helpless state. They can be possessed, they can be bound, they can be exorcised, they can be dissipated, they can be obligated, they can be expelled, ignored, or sundered. Some of the above consequences can only be chosen by spirits capable of that action. Defeat does not inevitably need to result in something bad. Many spirit combats are not antagonistic at all, but rather a test of an enemy's strength, or the abstract representation of a negotiation where the spirit and animus are debating with empathic images and memory. Winning such a challenge sways the loser to regard the victor with respect, perhaps even capitulating a passionately debated issue. Okay, then there's the recurring trait, right? If you beat a spirit down to 0 and, shred it to pieces, if it has a recurring trait, eventually it will come back, right? It will restore itself over time. Spirit combat options. Using magic points as spiritual hit points is the default method, right? Tenacity, as well as storing or producing magic points, which are used in the mundane world to fuel magic pow, also creates tenacity. But this is an option, okay? You don't have to use tenacity. It's an option. I highly recommend you don't have to use this, okay? Pow and tenacity are equal, right? So you just tenacity equals pow, right? So to measure the character's resilience when in the spirit world, tenacity points are the focus of spirit damage, preserving magic points solely for the use of magic, and ensuring that magicians defeated in spirit combat are still capable of maintaining their earthly magical powers afterwards. Tenacity is independent of magical effort, providing them with a level playing field when placed beside iron-willed warrior types. Yeah, so if they don't have any of those other skills and you're a warrior and you get your soul yanked into the spirit world, you can use tenacity, right, and your willpower to fight back and still be a badass. And people may not want to mess with you. Tenacity, there's a little sidebar, mental resistance. Tenacity has the additional benefit of becoming a flexible measure of other mental states. I'm sorry, what page am I on? 139. Page 139. Tenacity has the additional benefit of becoming a flexible measure of other mental states. Alright. Like if you have supernatural and horrific creatures in your game, right, you can have people lose tenacity points as a form of registering how much sanity they retain, right? The less tenacity they have, the closer to insanity they become, right? It could also be for resisting corruption, experiencing battle fatigue, suffering addictions, facing supernatural forces, and so forth, right? A physical damage, right? Appropriate for nearly all sword and sorcery genres, this option is the perfect replacement for personal magic points in worlds where magic and violent sacrifice is rife. Nonetheless, it is best suited for campaigns where spirit combat is only used to harm and destroy rather than for abstract challenges, right? But spirits can keep their hit points, their magic points as hit points. All corporeal beings can take about the same amount of damage, regardless of whether they're magic users or not. Injuries suffered during combat, spirit combat, become more visceral since damage is applied to hit locations. Although the animus gains an increase in effective spiritual hit points, in fact, characters become increasingly vulnerable to spiritual beings with large spirit damage. To offset location vulnerability, animus and sapient spirits possessing knowledge of armor can manifest psychic protection with a value of 1 armor point per 20% of the trance skill. Since spirit damage is applied directly to locational hit points, serious and major wounds have duplicate physiological effects on an animist. Keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm skipping possession and exorcism. I'm skipping animism tricks. Alright, you can read that stuff yourself. Designing spirits, it's pretty simple, right? Each type of spirit possesses one or more abilities which encompass their powers. Any advantage a spirit might offer when bound should be capable of being sustained as a permanent effect. An advantage is always proportional to a spirit's intensity, very important there. Okay. All spirits possess certain default skills. Here's where you get a spectral combat skill, right? It's equal to 50% plus Pa plus Cha, and a willpower of 50% plus Pow times 2. Spirit abilities. There's a whole bunch of them. Several of the following abilities rely on spirit first infesting the target in the form of either dominant, passive, or convert possession. Okay, so it possesses the fetish. Okay, just keep it simple, right? And there's 3 ways of applying spirit powers. One is augmentation. The simplest and safest spirits are nature and guardian spirits who augment the animus. The spirit gives the practitioner a benefit by flowing through or around his body and is easily returned to a fetish. An animus who walks through some form of magical anti-spirit barrier will strip his augmenting spirits away if it is powerful enough to affect them, right? Guardian nature spirits are usually friendly to you, and that's why this is easier, right? Embodiment. This is the active task of assimilating a spirit's powers and advantages into the animist's physical being, directly channeling and becoming one with the spirit. Okay. Elemental shape-shifting spirits, you can see where this is going, work in this way. Embodiment can be risky, right? What if you fumble? You set the spirit free, right? You might screw yourself. And abdication. This is like you get total possession. You just go, okay, I will let you possess me and I'll be a puppet. Alright, so there's a whole bunch of spirit abilities here. Come down to there's some example spirits on page 145. It talks about Ancestor Spirits, Bane Spirits are on page 147 with this beautiful illustration, right, with the Wraith, the Cursed Spirit, the Elemental, and the Predator Spirit. Then you have the next page is Death Spirits, Elemental Spirits, Fetches. Now this is very special spirit here, a fetch. Alright, this is the last thing I'm going to go into, because the rest, Guardian Spirit, Haunts, I mean, they're all pretty self-explanatory. You have to read them, right? And, you know, and then you go into mysticism, okay? If you're going to use those other ones, alright? But let's go take a look at this fetch thing. So I'm just going to read this verbatim, because a fetch is like one of those things you kind of want to do. You're going to quest for a fetch. A fetch is a shaman's spiritual ally, represent the opening of his consciousness in the spirit world. Not every shamanic tradition features fetches, and those that do vary in the nature of the fetch. In some traditions, the fetch is the awakened other half of the shaman. In this case, a fetch and shaman are 2 sides of the same soul, with the fetch perceiving and traveling the spirit world, whilst the shaman exists on the mundane plane. In other traditions, the fetch is a totemic spirit who is drawn to the shaman to become his spiritual guide. In both cases, the shaman must undertake a successful quest in order to gain his fetch. Questing for a fetch is over here in the sidebar. Questing for a fetch is a dangerous ritual, and if it fails, it may cripple or kill the shaman. No mechanics are suggested to abstract this process, since such an epic undertaking should be played out in the form of a highly challenging scenario. A fetch's abilities vary widely between traditions. In cases where the fetch is the shaman's counterpart, it represents the opening of spiritual abilities to the shaman rather than being an independent being in its own right. The fetch might provide the shaman with exotic powers, such as the ability to shape change. If the fetch is an animal or ancestor god, then the shaman may gain the ability to communicate with the animals of the fetch's species, control them, or gain the traits of that creature, or become party to certain secrets if the fetch is an ancestor. There are two main choices when designing a fetch. An awakened fetch, where the shaman simply unlocks or expands a hitherto hidden part of his soul, or an allied fetch, which is a separate spirit that forms a lifelong pact with the shaman. Unless otherwise stated, a fetch cannot roam any further from the shaman's soul to which it is bound than his POW in meters. Fetches can grow in experience just as a shaman does. If desired, a shaman can transfer any or all of his experience rolls to his fetch instead. Fetch types. Fetch abilities. A whole bunch of them, right? There's 20 of these listed, right? And gaining a fetch always brings certain side effects. The fetch may influence the personality of the shaman depending on its totemic nature. For example, a bear spirit fetch, again the bear spirit, may cause the shaman to become soporific during the winter. The fetch may draw upon the magic points of the shaman in times of dire need. The fetch will abandon the shaman if he betrays the teachings of the shamanic tradition. Okay, so say you want to use one of your bindings, right? And you have a fetish. Let's say it's a feather, and you're using an eagle spirit or whatever, right? So action point, binding skill roll if you're successful, and it has, like let's say, it allows you to use wings to fly, right? It manifests wings on your back to fly, right? Maybe that's one way to do it, right? Another one would be a creature with magic use or spell casting ability, right? Um, and it'll allow you, the shaman, to cast magic, right? Or it will cast magic on behalf of the summoner, right? And it will do this because of its, it's performing the task as asked, and then when you're done, you bind it back in, right? So when you're done, I believe you have to bind it back in once it's done, or it goes back to doing it. Maybe it's only for the combat, and maybe it goes back into its thing, into its fetish, and I can't remember how that works. I'll have to look that up one more time. But alright, so you kind of get more or less how to use animism. I hope I explained that fairly decently. I mean, there's a lot to read here, and that's kind of animism in a nutshell. And I hope you take up the challenge to use animism in your games. Pretty exciting, kind of weird and cool all at the same time. You can get really creative, and there's a lot of role-playing experiences there. There's a lot of room for creating otherworldly things like the spirit realm, what things look like in sound, feel, taste, touch, all the different senses that you might want to use to describe these places and what they look like. So that's about it. I'm going to cut it short because we're already at an hour almost. We're at 50 minutes, 48 minutes, somewhat. I hope you guys have a great time gaming and using animism. I might have to cut this into 2 parts. So if I all of a sudden cut it into 2 parts, it's going to stop all of a sudden and start again in another video. But thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoy this video. Keep gaming. Enjoy yourselves. Bye.